Greetings, everyone. Lee Khan here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. We are right at the end. We are in the penultimate chapter here. Taratha has been found out. Thrall is right there with his army of a couple thousand, right up outside of Durnholde. They're ready to come. Thought about offering a truce. Taratha's like, he's not going to take some white flag kind of approach. So I'm guessing this is going to have a final showdown with Thrall either whooping butt or doing something dangerous and reckless due to the grief, because they're either going to use Taratha as a ploy, or she's already just been ravaged and it's game over. All right, so let's find out. Stay a while and listen to chapter 19 of The Lord of the Clans. The day dawned misty and foggy. Thrall smelled rain in the air. He would have preferred a sunny day, the better to see the enemy, but rain would keep his warriors cooler. And besides, Thrall could control the rain if it came down to that. For now, he would let the weather do what it would. He, Hellscream, and a small group of Frostwolves would go ahead. The army would follow behind. He would have preferred to utilize the cover provided by the trees, but an army of nearly 2,000 would need the road. If Blackmore kept scouts posted, then he would be alerted. Thrall did not remember such scouts from his time at Durnholde, but things were very different now. His small advance party, armored and armed, moved steadily down the road toward Durnholde. Thrall called a small songbird and asked it to look about for him. It came back in a few minutes, and in his mind Thrall heard, "They have seen you. They are racing back to the keep. Others are moving to circle behind." Thrall frowned. This was quite well organized for Blackmore. Nonetheless, he knew his army outnumbered the men at Durnholde nearly 4-1. The bird, perched on one of his massive forefingers, waited. "Fly to my army and find the old blind shaman. Tell him what you have told me." The songbird, its body a golden, yellow, and black, and its head bright blue, inclined its blue head and flew to execute Thrall's request. Drekthar was a trained warrior as well as a shaman. He would know what to do with the bird's warning. He pressed on, feet steadily moving forward. The road curved, and then Durnholde in all its proud, stony glory loomed up before them. Thrall sensed a change in his group. "Hold up the flag of truce," he said. "We will observe the proprieties, and it may prevent them from opening fire too soon." "Before, we have stormed the encampments with ease," he acknowledged. "Now we must face something more difficult. Durnholde is a fortress and will not be taken easily, but mark me. If negotiations fail, then fall Durnholde will." He hoped it would not come to that, but he expected the worst. It was unlikely that Blackmore would be reasonable. Even as he and his companions moved forward, Thrall could see movements on the parapets and walkways. Looking more closely, he saw the mouths of cannons opening toward him. Archers took their positions, and several dozen mounted knights came cantering around the sides of the fortress to line up in front of it. They carried lances and spears and halted their horses. They were waiting. Still Thrall came. There was more movement atop the walls directly above the huge wooden door, and his heart sped up a little. It was Adelis Blackmore. Thrall halted. They were close enough to shout. He would approach no farther. "Well, well," came the slurred voice that Thrall remembered all too well. "If it isn't my little pet orc, all grown up." Thrall did not rise to the bait. "Greetings, Lieutenant General," he said. "I come not as a pet, but as a leader of an army that has defeated your men soundly in the past. But I will make no move against them this day, unless you force my hand." Langston stood beside his lord on the walkway. He couldn't believe it. Blackmore was rip-roaring drunk. Langston, who had helped Tamis carry his lord to bed more times than he cared to admit, had never seen Blackmore so drunk and still able to stand. What had he been thinking? Blackmore had had the girl followed, of course. A scout, a master of stealth and sharp of eye, had unbarred the door in the courier's stable so she would be able to emerge from the tunnel. He had watched her greet Thrall and a few other orcs. He had seen her give them a sack of food, seen her embrace the monster by the light, and then return via the no longer secret tunnel. Blackmore had feigned his drunkenness last evening and had been quite sober when the shocked girl had walked back into his bedchamber to be greeted by Blackmore, Langston, and the others. Taratha had not wanted to talk, but once she learned that she had been spied upon, she made great haste to assure Blackmore that Thrall had come to talk peace. The very notion had offended Blackmore deeply. He dismissed Langston and the other guards, and for many paces outside his door Langston could still hear Blackmore cursing, and even the sound of a hand striking flesh. He hadn't seen Blackmore again until this moment, though Tamis had reported to him. Blackmore had sent out his fastest riders to get reinforcements, but they were still at least 4 hours away. The logical thing to do would be to keep the orc, who had after all raised the flag of truce, talking until help arrived. In fact, etiquette demanded that Blackmore send out a small party of his own to talk with the orcs. Surely Blackmore would give the order any moment. Yes, it was the logical thing to do. If the count was right, and Langston thought it was, the orcish army numbered over 2,000. There were 540 men in Durnholde, of whom fewer than 400 were trained warriors who had seen combat. As he watched uneasily, Langston saw movement on the horizon. They were too far away for him to detect individuals, but he clearly saw a huge green sea begin to move slowly over the rise, and heard the steady unnerving sound of drums. Thrall's army. Though the morning was cool, Langston felt sweat break out under his arms. "That's nice, Thrall," Blackmore was saying. As Thrall watched disgusted, the former war hero swayed and caught himself on the wall. "What did you have in mind?" Once again, pity warred with hatred in his heart. "We have no desire to fight humans anymore unless you force us to defend ourselves. But you hold many hundreds of orc prisoners, Blackmore, in your vile encampments. They will be freed one way or another. We can do it without more unnecessary bloodshed. Willingly release all the orcs held prisoner in the encampments, and we will return to the wilds and leave humans alone." Blackmore threw back his head and laughed. "Ho, ho, ho, ho," he gasped, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes. Oh, you are better than the king's jester, Thrall. Slave! I swear it is more entertaining to watch you now than it was when you fought in the gladiator ring. Listen to you. Using complete sentences by the light. Think you understand mercy, do you?" Langston felt a tug on his sleeve. He jumped and turned to behold Sergeant. "I've no great love for you, Langston," the man growled, his eyes fierce. "But at least you're sober. You've got to shut Blackmore up. Get him down from there. You've seen what the orcs can do." "We can't possibly surrender," gasped Langston, though in his heart he wanted to. "Nay," said Sergeant, "but we should at least send out men to talk with him, buy some time for our allies to get here. He did send for reinforcements, didn't he?" "Of course he did," Langston hissed. Their conversation had been overheard, and Blackmore turned bloodshot eyes in their direction. There was a small sack at his feet, and he nearly stumbled over it. "Ah, Sergeant," he boomed, lurching over toward him. "Thrall, here's an old friend." Thrall sighed. Langston thought he looked the most composed of all of them. "I am sorry that you are still here, Sergeant." "As am I," Langston heard the sergeant mutter. Louder, Sergeant said, "You've been away too long, Thrall." "Convince Blackmore to release the orcs, and I swear on the honor that you taught me, and I possess, none within these walls shall come to harm."
My lord," said Langston nervously, "you recall what powers I saw displayed in the last conflict? Thrall had me and he let me go. He kept his word. I know he's only an orc, but—"
"You hear that, Thrall?" bellowed Blackmore. "You're only an orc. Even that idiot Langston says so. What can I of humans surrenders to an orc?" He rushed forward and leaned over the wall. "Why'd you do it, Thrall?" he cried brokenly. "I gave you everything. You and me. We had those greenskins of yours against the lions, and had all the food and wine and gold we could want." Langston stared, horrified. Blackmore was now screaming his treachery to all within earshot. At least he hadn't implicated Langston, yet.
Langston wished he had the guts to just shove Blackmore over the wall and surrender the fortress to Thrall right now. Thrall didn't waste the opportunity.
"Do you hear that, men of Durnholde?" he bellowed. "Your lord and master would betray all of you. Rise up against him. Take him away. Yield to us, and at the end of the day you will still have your lives and your fortress."
But there was no sudden stirring of rebellion, and Thrall supposed he couldn't blame them.
"I ask you once more, Blackmore. Negotiate or die."
Blackmore stood up to his full height. Thrall now saw that he held something in his right hand. It was a sack.
"Here's my answer, Thrall."
He reached into the sack and pulled something out. Thrall couldn't see what it was, but he saw Sargent and Langston recoil. Then the object came hurtling toward him and struck the ground, rolling to a stop at Thrall's feet. Taratha's blue eyes stared sightlessly up at him from her severed head.
"That's what I'll do with traitors!"
screamed Blackmore, dancing madly on the walkway.
"That's what we do with people who love, who betray us, who take everything and give nothing, who sympathize with double-damn orcs."
Thrall didn't hear him. Thunder was rolling in his ears. His knees went weak, and he fell to the earth. Gorge rose in his throat, and his vision swam. It couldn't be. Not Tari. Surely not even Blackmore could do such an abominable thing to an innocent. But blessed unconsciousness would not come. He remained stubbornly awake, staring at long blonde hair, blue eyes, and a bloody severed neck. And the horrible image blurred. Wetness poured down his face. His chest heaving with agony, Thrall recalled Tari's words to him so long ago. These are called tears. They come when we are so sad, so soul-sick. It's as if our hearts are so full of pain there's no place else for it to go. But there was a place for the pain to go. Into action. Into revenge. Red flooded Thrall's vision now, and he threw back his head and screamed with rage such as he had never before experienced. The cry burned his throat with its raw fury. The sky boiled. Dozens of lightning strikes split the clouds, dazzling the eye for a moment. The furious peals of crashing thunder that followed nearly deafened the men at the fortress. Many of them dropped their weapons and fell to their knees, gibbering terror at the celestial display of fury that so clearly echoed the wrenching pain of the orc leader. It's kind of like what happened with Malfurion in our War of the Ancients trilogy. Blackmore laughed, obviously mistaking Thrall's rage for helpless grief. When the last peals of thunder died down, he yelled, "They said you couldn't be broken. Well, I broke you, Thrall. I broke you!" Thrall's cry died away, and he stared at Blackmore. Even across this distance, he could see the blood drain from Blackmore's face, as his enemy now, finally, began to understand what he had roused with his brutal murder. Thrall had come hoping to end this peacefully. Blackmore's actions had destroyed that chance utterly. Blackmore would not live to see another sunrise, and his keep would shatter like fragile glass before the orcish attack. "Thrall!" It was Hellscream, uncertain as to Thrall's state of mind. Thrall, his chest still raw with grief and tears still streaming down his broad green face, impaled him with his glance. Mingled sympathy and approval showed in Hellscream's expression. Slowly, harnessing his powerful self-control, Thrall raised the great warhammer. He began to stamp his feet, one right after the other in a powerful, steady rhythm. The others joined him at once, and very faintly, the earth trembled. Langston stared, sickened and appalled at the girl's head on the ground 30 feet below. He had known Blackmore had a streak of cruelty, but he had never imagined.
"What have you done?"
The words exploded from Sargent, who grabbed Blackmore and spun him around to face him. Blackmore began laughing hysterically. Sergeant went cold inside as he heard the screams and then felt the slight tremble in the stone.
My lord, he makes the earth shake. We must fire. 2,000 orcs all stomping their feet. Of course the orcs gonna shake,
snarled Blackmore. He veered back toward the wall, apparently intent upon verbally tormenting the orcs still further. They were lost, Langston thought. It was too late to surrender now. Thrall was going to use his demonic magic and destroy the fortress and everyone in it as retaliation for the girl. His mouth worked, but nothing came out. He felt Sergeant staring at him.
Damn the lot of you noble-born heartless bastards,
Sergeant hissed, then bellowed.
Fire!
Thrall did not even twitch when the cannons went off. Behind him he heard screams of torment, but he was untouched. He called on the spirit of Earth, pouring out his pain, and Earth responded. In a clean, precise, direct line, the Earth heaved and buckled. It went straight from Thrall's feet to the mammoth door like the burrowing of some giant underground creature. The door shuddered. The surrounding stone trembled and a few small stones fell, but it was more soundly built than the slapped-together walls of the encampments, and held. Blackmore shrieked. His world took on a very sharp focus, and for the first time since he had gotten himself drunk enough to order Taratha Foxton's execution, he was thinking clearly. Langston hadn't exaggerated. Thrall's powers were immense, and his tactic to break the orc had failed. In fact, it had roused him to an even greater fury, and as Blackmore watched, panicked and sick, thousands of huge green forms flowed down the road in a river of death. He had to get out. Thrall was going to kill him. He just knew it. Somehow Thrall was going to find him and kill him for what he'd done to Taratha.
Taratha, I loved you. Why did you do this to me?
Someone was shouting. Langston was yapping in one ear, his pretty face purple and eyes bulging with fear, and Sergeant's voice was in the other, screaming nonsensical noises. He stared at them helplessly. Sergeant spat some more words, then turned to the men. They continued to load and fire the cannons, and below Blackmore the mounted knights charged the ranks of orcs. He heard battle cries and the clash of steel. The black armor of his men milled with the ugly green skin of the orcs, and here and there was a flash of white fur, as by the light had Thrall really managed to call white wolves to his army?
Too many, he whispered. Oh, too many. So many of them.
Again the very walls of the fortress shook. Fear such as Blackmore had never known shuddered through him, and he fell to his knees. It was in this position, crawling like a dog, that he made his way down the steps and into the courtyard. The knights were all outside fighting, and Blackmore presumed dying. Inside, the men who were left were shrieking and gathering what they could to defend themselves, scythes, pitchforks, even the wooden training weapons with which a much younger Thrall had honed his fighting skills. A peculiar yet familiar smell filled Blackmore's nostrils. Fear. That was it. He'd reeked of the stench in battles past, had smelled it on dead men's corpses. He'd forgotten how it had churned his stomach. It wasn't supposed to be this way. The orcs on the other side of the now shuddering gates were supposed to be his army. Their leader, out there screaming Blackmore's name over and over again, was supposed to be his docile, obedient slave. Tari was supposed to be here. Where was she, anyway? And then he remembered his own lips forming around the order that had taken her life, and he was sick. Right in front of his men, sick in body, sick in soul. "He's lost control!" bellowed Langston, inches from Sergeant's ear, shouting to be heard of the sounds of cannon, sword impacting shield, and cries of pain. Yet again the walls shuddered.
"He lost control long ago," Sergeant shouted back.
"You're in command, Lord Langston. What would you have us do?"
"Surrender!"
Langston shrieked without hesitation. Sergeant, his eyes on the battle 30 feet below, shook his head.
"Too late for that. Blackmore's done us all in. We've got to fight for it now until Thrall decides he wants a top piece again. If he ever does." "What would you have us do?" Sergeant demanded him. Anything resembling logical thought had fled from Langston's brain. This thing called battle? He was not made for it. Twice now he had crumbled in the face of it. He knew himself for a coward. and despised himself for it, but the fact remained. "Would you like me to take command of the defense of Durnholde, sir?" asked Sergeant. Langston turned wet, grateful eyes to the older man and nodded. "Right then," said Sergeant, who turned to face the men in the courtyard and began screaming orders. At that moment, the door shattered and a wave of orcs crashed into the courtyard of one of the most powerfully constructed fortresses in the land. Yeah, we knew it was going to be grim for Tartha. That's a bummer. I do think there's some parallels here when you've got something, and I'm imagining this book was written first, so I think the guy, I can't remember, Richard Knack, who wrote the War of the Ancients trilogy, he's tapping on a lot of these same ideas where with him it was Malfurion in his rage and his grief and everything that tapped and tied into the elements. And I think it's cool how Thrall's basically doing that. Not as powerful as Malfurion, but still pretty darn cool, pretty powerful. I mean, obviously Thrall is awesome. I don't know that we're actually going to get like any kind of battle scene in our final chapter because we've only got one to go, and part of that has to be spent on almost like an epilogue of sorts since we don't have one of those in this book. I think we might just get like a recap, like that's kind of what happened. I do think in general also, from our experience reading the Christie Golden novels, she tends to shy away from the large scale battles and hone in on the more visceral human elements of like snapshots kind of. So I think a vignette would be, little scenes of what happened, might happen, or it might just be a recap. I don't think she's going to get into detail like some kind of big massive. Those are less fun to read, even when you see movies, seeing the giant battles are not as fun as seeing like small scale battles. All right, we got one to go. I thank everybody so much for listening. We got another episode of the Pipe 5x5. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time on Lore of Warcraft.